What's up guys, this is Evan with Backwoods Adventure Mods. Today I'm going to walk through an installation of our new low pro bumper for the 3rd Gen Tundra. Now what sets this one apart from the others on the market is that it's a hybrid design. So the outer shell is all aluminum, so it's a lightweight, easy install, rust isn't an issue, and the internal structure is all steel, so you maintain the strength where you need it. This fits all different packages of the 3rd Gen Tundra, including with or without the active air dam. So let's get started. This is going to be a relatively straightforward install. We're only replacing the lowermost section of the OEM bumper. So the beauty there is you don't have to mess with any parking sensors or lights. There's no major body cutting. We will be doing some cutting, but nothing's going to really remain visible. And there's no drilling unless you have the active air dam. We're going to drill one little hole. So like I said, the outer shell is aluminum, which keeps it light. If you inevitably get rock chips, that won't rust. This is the outer shell. You can see our recovery points will stick through these holes, and here we have some enlarged holes for airflow as well as winch access. This will be the last piece to go on. We'll install the mounts and the winch cradle first, and the beauty there is that you'll have your winch tray exposed. You can bolt in the winch, wire it up, hook up any zip ties or anything else you need to do, and then we'll put the outer shell on. Here we have the frame mounts with the recovery points, the shackle mounts built in, have some extra brackets, fender attachment points, and if you have the active air dam, you'll use a couple of these. And of course, grade 8 hardware for putting it together. Let's get started. First step is going to be removing this grille and bumper fascia assembly. I'm going to start on the left side and work my way around and then get the bolts and hardware and wiring on top. So we're going to hit a few bolts here along this interface and then work our way around. I'm going to use a 10mm wrench or socket to take these out. We're going to need to take out just enough of these to be able to pop the fender flare away so that we can get the bumper out forward. To pop the fender flare out, I'm going to peel this felt liner back out of the way. And then I can feel the tabs that I need to squeeze, so I'm not just going to grip and rip. There, that'll be just enough. To pop this side piece out, take note that it's kind of hooked around this black round plastic part, so I'm going to peel it rearward off that before I ask it to come out sideways. And then it's just a few tabs through here that will pop out. Okay, same thing on the other side. Now we're on the top side. First thing to do is remove the wiring plugs. If you have a TRD Pro, you'll have a few extra clips here and there, but just take off anything that you can see that attaches to the grill. So it's those two. There's two very similar on the other side. There's also going to be this little plastic push-in rivet. And then we're going to take out these 4 10mm head bolts across the top. There are 2 tabs way down low that hold this middle section in. You're not going to be able to see it until I take it off, but I'll point to where I'm talking about. So these 2 steel brackets, there's one on each side. If you follow it down, there's a long plastic tab way in there. You lift up with your finger, and then you can pop the center out. There. Then the full assembly should come off. It's still snapped on over here. So these are the little tabs I was talking about lifting up. One here, one over here, and they snap into these little plastic guys on the truck. We're just going to set this aside from now. If you don't have the active air dam, you can skip this step. Now, I've taken out 2 bolts out of the middle. You don't need to do that. I just want to illustrate how this works for anybody who's curious. So once you speed up to a certain speed, this thing pops down, and then once you slow down to a different specific speed, it hides away up in the bumper. So we're going to get rid of this option, but we do have to keep this giant motor that drives it so that there's no check engine light. So for now, I'm just going to unplug the harness that goes to it and unclip it along the way, and then we'll take the bumper off as normal. Next step, we're going to remove the aluminum bumper. You need a 17mm wrench and a 17mm socket. We're just going to take this off and set it aside. Be careful if you have the active air dam on it, because we're going to reuse that motor. We'll take a minute now to talk about the active air dam motor. If you don't have the active air dam, you can just skip this step. First, we're going to bumper. It's just a 10mm socket. Now we'll set the bumper aside. So we're going to keep this still functional, but we're going to cut off this whale tail looking portion because this would swing around and kind of hit whatever is going to be in front of it. So we're going to cut it off flush with this round cylinder. So in order to do that cleanly, we're going to take this assembly out, cut it, put it back together. So first we're going to take off this plastic cover. You just grab a screwdriver or a trim tool, pop this little guy out, and the cover will pop off. Then we're going to use a 14mm and a 10mm to take this long bolt out. These little end caps come out. There will also be a spring inside. Lined up just right so everything comes out. So we'll swing this whole thing up. Okay, now we're just going to cut off everything flush to the circular part except these little tabs. These little tabs are important because that's the stop that tells it when to quit turning. So we're just going to cut flush kind of along the smooth part of this cylinder, leaving those tabs. You can use a cutoff wheel on a grinder, or really any cutting tool. I'm going to use my weapon of choice, which is a little oscillating tool. Now I'm just going to clean that up a little bit more. The cut's done, it's time to reassemble. Make sure you put it in with the tabs facing the same way as you took it apart. This is a lot of little pieces to hold, so I found it's easiest to kind of lay it on its side. So I'm going to start with one of the little white pieces. Make sure you turn it the right way, and that's going to be the bigger of the cylinders facing away from the center, so facing down in this case. I'm going to set it right there. I'll drop the trimmed cylinder on top and line it up with the stopper. I'll drop the spring in, centered around that little white cylinder. Then I'm going to put this upper one in, make sure it goes into the spring. And I will try to slide this piece on top, center the internals, and kind of work it into back where it belongs. There we go. Make sure it's lined up and then put these outer caps on. Then the bolt, nut. And if it looks like the bolt's not long enough anymore, that's because the spring is in there doing its job. When you tighten it up, it'll pull it all back together. Reassemble this plastic cover. All right, there it is, ready to install on the truck. Okay, now to mount this in its new location. This is not a hybrid. In just a minute, we'll go over where to put it if it's a hybrid because you'll have some extra fans. But in this scenario, we're going to mount it on the passenger side of center and kind of tuck it into this space right here. In order to do that, we've got to prep it just a little bit. We're going to take out the hose, take out this bolt, this nut, and this bolt just because we'll need that for the bracket. And then we're going to put the hose back behind the bracing. Pop the hose out here, pop it out of this one, and release it from this stud. Put it back behind. Now we're just going to carefully pull it down and behind this guy. There. We can put it back in here, and we can put this one back in. So in order to put this motor back here, we have two brackets. You'll have an upper bracket that will be the same regardless whether you have a hybrid or not. It's going to go up in here. Your lower bracket looks like this. Yours will be powder coated, and it's basically going to go right here. It's going to be an exact opposite of this to put on the hybrid motor, and you should have one of each. It'll go over here on this side, and the bends will be reversed. So in order to do that, we're going to take out this bolt and put it back in with the bracket. So I'm just going to try to make this more or less level. There's plenty of adjustability, so you don't need to be perfect. I'm really just going to lift it up from touching by about 1/8 inch or so on that end and tighten it down. Now we're going to drill a 1/4 inch hole through here so we can add a second mounting bolt. I'm a fan of a pilot hole, so I've got an 1/8 inch pilot bit. I'll drill through the center and then step up to a 1/4 inch. Take note that there's an AC condenser right behind where we're drilling, so don't use too long of a bit or be extra careful that you don't drill too far past where you're supposed to. One last little step before we start adding hardware. I want to be able to remount this hose back to this stud, but we need to bend the mounting bracket for the stud back just a little ways to pull the hose away from where the motor is going to be. So we're just going to bend it. I want to bend it from this point, and I want to kind of hold this point from moving much. So I'm going to use 2 different wrenches or pairs of pliers, whatever you have. I'm going to grab this end with a wrench in my case, and I'm going to use these slip joint pliers to hold this steady and just push it back. Let's see how that looks. We might go a little bit more. I'm going to go just a hair more. I don't mind the motor putting a little pressure on the hose, but I don't want to put too much. Okay. All right. Now we'll loosely install the hardware that holds the motor to the brackets. I'm going to get the hardware started but not completely tightened down for the air dam motor. So first, for the hole we just drilled, by the way, this is going to be the 1/4 inch hardware that you have, and we have oversized fender washers for some of the points on the actual motor. All right, now we'll mount the motor, same hardware. Make sure you do use these oversized washers, because if not, these little steel spacers that go through the plastic could pop out if the washer is any smaller than the actual steel part is. Now for the upper bracket. It's going to use, at least on this passenger side install, it's going to use the leftmost as we can see it, rightmost on the truck hole. And this C-shaped bracket is going to go in between there and just to the underside of this pre-existing hole. So I'm going to wiggle this in place and then start the hardware. I'm going to do the top one first. I want my washer to sit under that black plastic piece so it's not going to pinch it. Starting this nut without dropping the lock washer is the trickiest part. Lastly will be the bottom bolt for the same bracket. All right, that's all the bolts. I'm going to tighten this with a 7/16 wrench or socket, whatever makes sense. And I'm going to tighten from the top down. So top bolt, lower bolt in the top bracket, and then the bottom 3 bolts in the lower bracket. Now that the bolts are tight, don't forget to plug the motor back in. Now we're going to cut away to a different truck and show you how to install the motor on the driver's side on a hybrid engine. Okay, we're here in front of a hybrid truck. This truck didn't come with the active air dam, but here's the motor from the other truck so I can show you everything but the wiring routing. Now instead of going on this side like on the non-hybrid trucks, we're going to put it over here. As you can see, there's a nice big fan here in the way. So you're going to use the opposite bracket, put it on this side, which we'll go through in a minute. We're basically going to put this motor right here, kind of in between the horn and this AC line and above this cross member. So I'll show you how to do that. And just to get a little bit of extra room on the wiring, we're going to flip this over. We're going to prep the area by taking the horn off and setting it aside, and then we'll move this hose out of the way, and then we'll put the bracket in place. 12mm socket for the horn. Just going to set that aside for now. Pop the hose out of its little clips. And then you'll want to grab a 14mm socket to take this bolt out. We'll start by putting our brackets in. So this is going to use this pre-existing hole in the top of the core support using the included 1/4 inch hardware. Both brackets are in and not completely tight yet. Quick note, we're not actually going to drill the hole on this truck, but this is where you would drill your second hole, just like in the other part of the video. Just be very careful and note the fan behind it. You might use a drill stop, or just be very careful not to go too deep. Also, the wiring plug, make sure you have it clipped in before you put this in place, because it's going to be competing for space with this plug on the AC line. Lastly, on the wiring, it's going to be tied in with this harness. So for this speaker, to get a little bit more length out of it, take the speaker out with this bolt here, flip it upside down, and mount it here, and that'll give you just enough play in your harness. We're going to move forward pretending that this plug is already plugged in. We're going to slip the motor behind the hose and make sure that this top hole is underneath the upper bracket. And you'll notice that you're going to be pushing up against this AC line. We'll address that in just a minute. For now, I'm going to install the lower and upper mounting bolts into this lower bracket. Once the 3 bolts are installed for the motor, the horn is just going to nest back in its original place like it was made for it. So use the same 12mm head bolt to put the horn back in. The last thing to address is the AC line. So we're going to very gently kind of massage it, bend it out of the way. It'll help to loosen up this tin just a little bit. Then we can rotate this bracket over. That'll buy us a little bit of room. Push it over and tighten it back down. Then we're just going to gently bend this away, and you want to make sure you don't kink it anywhere. So kind of use both hands, and after you've moved it, make sure it's not rubbing on any of the bracketry, core support, or anything else. And that's it. Okay, at this point, whether or not you had the active air dam, now we're ready to start installing the bumper. We're going to use a couple of these existing holes on the side of the frame. You may have these black plastic plugs. If you do, just pop them out with a screwdriver. We're not going to reuse them, so it's okay if they break. I haven't decided for sure what I think is my favorite order to put this on in, but I think we're going to do it like this. We'll take the winch cradle and put these long cross bolts through the side of the frame. That'll allow it to pivot up into place. And these frame brackets with the shackle mounts actually have a tab that the winch cradle rests on. So we're going to swing it up into place and then slide this on that stud and get a couple bolts started. That way everything will be held in place, and then we can easily start the bolts. If you're working with 2 people, you can really do it in whatever order you want, but I like to do the installs solo, so that's how we're going to do it. So these 2 gaps here are going to slide around the frame. We don't even have to put a nut on it right now. We'll just get the bolt in place. Now this stud is just going to be used to hold this in place temporarily. We're not even going to put a piece of hardware on it. So once we get a bolt started in here, it'll hold the winch cradle up. I'm just going to use one of the factory bolts in the 2 bottom holes, get it started. I'm going to put one down from the top. Okay, same thing on the other side, and it'll hold itself in place now. I've got enough in here to hold it in place. Now I'm just going to go through and put all the rest of the hardware in. So the only place we're going to use factory bolts are in the bottom 2 and the end of the frame. Then we're going to use 7/16 bolts. They're all the same all throughout the rest of the kit. Anywhere you can see a place to bolt something together, do that. Then there's a couple that are hidden. So from the underside of the frame, we're going to run a 3/8 and a 7/16 bolt up. We have these little brackets marked with a D and a P. So I've got the D for driver. I'm going to slide it in through here. Then I'm going to run my 7/16 bolt up through the bottom and into that weld nut. Same thing on this side. All the bolts are in, it's time to tighten them down. As far as which order, as long as I pull the winch cradle up to the bottom of the frame first, the rest of the order shouldn't matter too much. So I'm going to start with the 3/8 and 7/16 bolts on the bottom. So your 3/8 bolts, we use a 9/16 socket, a wrench. The 7/16 bolts are unique because they're a 7/16 grade 8. And for whatever reason, I'm not sure, the nut on a 7/16 uses an 11/16 wrench, where the bolt head uses a 5/8. And then the factory bolts are going to be a 17 millimeter. So you're going to use a combination of 3/8, 9/16, 5/8, 11/16, and a 17 millimeter. I'm going to go ahead and do my factory bolts next. All right, now that all the bolts are tight, it's time to put on the aluminum shell. Now, we're not going to put a winch in this truck right now, but if you are, this is the time to do it. If you can't wiggle it down past this, go ahead and temporarily take this off, put your winch in place, put this back on. The winch should sit behind here. Also, if you're not running a winch, like we're not, these two fairlead holes, do go ahead and put hardware in to sandwich the steel to the aluminum with those fairlead bolt holes. It's going to be part of the integrated strength of the bumper. All right, so it's pretty simple. We're just going to hang it on here, and I'm going to use those two holes to hold it all in place. All right, now I'm just going to put in the 4 bolts per side that hold the side flanges together. All the bolts are in, now it's time to tighten them down. Now there's no adjustment in the center too, so we're going to tighten these down first. So whether you don't have a winch or if you do, either way, if you do have a winch, your fairlead would be on by now. So let's tighten down these bolts first, and then we'll do the sides. Now I just want to make sure that it's kind of in a neutral position. So I like that. Now we're just going to tighten all these down. Now for the fun part, it's time to cut out this lower center section. So we're really just replacing this piece. In order to get a good clean cut, we need to pop this piece off first. There's some wiring and some clips, so we're going to flip this over and work from the backside for a minute. So this lower harness here, we're going to pop this out of all the little places where it's clipped in, and then we're going to undo the clips that hold this outer piece to the frame. Okay, we're going to discard this piece. I'm going to flip it back over. Now it's time to cut. This is one of the easier cut bumpers to do because there's only one little spot where there's a visible cut line. The rest of it's going to be hidden behind some trim plastic. If you didn't, when you took this main plastic piece off, release the clips to pop this up just a little bit, and I'll show you where we're going to cut. And that's this inner piece in here, right as it starts to curve off, to fall towards the back of the truck. We're just going to kind of cut right along in there where my fingernail is, a straight line up to this little tick mark here. And then we're going to cut right up to the left side of that oval notch. Then when we get to the top, we're going to cut just along the top edge right before it rolls over again, because I want to leave just a little bit for this to clip into. We'll bring that straight through here. Here's the only spot where you're going to really see your cut. So I've made a bit of a score line, but I've come up maybe 1/8 of an inch off this and down from the sensor maybe 1/4 inch or so. Really, I'm just trying to continue this line because this is what will remain visible. I'm trying to continue it straight across. From here over, I'm just going to put the blade right underneath this little grill looking piece and just cut it all the way across. Then we'll repeat on the passenger side. I'm going to leave a few little places connected to act as tabs so the whole thing doesn't fall as I cut. Make sure to keep your wires tucked out of the way. There we go. Now we're going to clean up the visible parts of the cut and snap the rest back together. You can use a deburring tool, a screwdriver. You could try to sand it. I like to use the blade of a pocket knife backwards. Okay, now we're going to put this back on the truck. It helps to have someone pull the fender flare sideways to get that slid in place, but it's not necessary. Also, try to make sure your wires go on top of the new bumper. Okay, we can put the rest of the hardware in the top of this, then we'll have some brackets to put in the bottom side. For the most part, the plastic is back in place, but we need something to support this side of the bumper. So we have this bent bracket, and I've already taken these two original bolts back out. The straight side is going to go towards the front of the truck, and it's going to dip down as it goes towards the outside. So it's going to eventually bolt up to this plastic piece. And I'm going to put the hardware back in. So you'll notice that the holes in this end are slotted left to right on the truck. The hole on this end is slotted front to back, so that gives you a lot of adjustability here. So what I like to do is make sure that the gap on the side, as seen from the front, is consistent. So I'm going to try to maintain that 1/8 inch or so gap by holding this in place as I tighten it down. I like it about there, so I'm going to tighten it down. Same thing on the other side. One little thing I want to button up, when we pop that wiring harness out of this area of the bumper, we lost its tabs that it clips into. So I'm going to take the harness and tuck it up a little bit further back into that little sheet metal cross member and zip tie it into place. That wraps it up. Check out our other 3rd Gen Tundra products on the website. And if you have any other questions, reach out to us at backwoodsadventuremods.com. Thanks for watching.